Hey everybody, I'm here. I want to go ahead and get started because I don't plan on being on here too late tonight. I don't plan on being on too late tonight. Hey Nurse, hey Lee, Shaylee, Leah, hey Robin, hey Nona, hey Kenzie, hey Momo, hey Nakenya, Amanda, Liz, Sierra, Dewana, Jay. You need a solution to Eric, Divine Queen. Okay. I think it was someone who asked me to do the opening argument. Hey, here for it. Hey, after class. Hey, Keontae. Yeah, someone had asked me for it, and I can't remember who it was that asked me for opening argument. And I'm gonna go ahead and start reviewing the opening argument for you guys. I know it's a couple of people. Oh yeah, Jay, I'm gonna go ahead and do a short one. It was Shay. Okay. I'm gonna do a short one and then I'm gonna continue for the rest of the week of those opening argument. Okay. I'm gonna start off with love. All right, here we go.
Law of the jungle. Now, this is the law of the jungle, as old and as true as the sky. And the wolf that shall keep it may prosper, but the wolf that shall break it must die. As the creeper that girdles the tree trunk, the law running forward and back. For the strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for being patient. Thank you so much for being honest during this very lengthy process that preceded this point here today during the voir dire process. I appreciate you all being here, exercising your civic duty, and honoring your obligation to pay close attention to what's going on in this courtroom for the next several, however many weeks.
Weeks, me months.
Some people like to say that opening statements are a roadmap to what the trial will show. Instead, I'm going to give you an overview, a bird's eye view, because you're going to be sitting here with evidence for the next several weeks at least. And you will be able to see what that evidence is. Nothing that I say to you during this part of the trial, nothing any other attorney says to you during this part of the trial is evidence. But I can tell you what I expect the evidence to show.
We all ready?
And what I expect the evidence to show in this case is that YSL, the group made up of the defendants sitting before you today, along with other both indicted and unindicted co-conspirators, YSL operated as a pack. The quote that I read to you earlier is from one of my favorite books as a kid, The Jungle Book. In case anybody recognized it, those were right out Kipling's words and not mine. But they are appropriate for where we are today. For 10 years and counting, the group calling itself Young Slime Life dominated dominated the Cleveland Avenue community of Fulton County. They created a crater in the middle of Fulton County's Cleveland Avenue community that sucked in the youth, the innocence, and even the lives of some of its youngest members. Now, the evidence is going to show that this group started out as a group called Rock Crew. And Rock Crew stands for Raised on Cleveland. The evidence is going to show you that Rock Crew, in fact, is a criminal street gang. It's not the kind y'all are used to. If you're more familiar with the national gangs, such as the Bloods and the Crips that operate in LA or in Chicago. But make no mistake about it, Rock Crew is and was a gang. It consisted of 3 or more members with common identifiers, signs, colors, linguistic choices that committed crimes on behalf of and in furtherance of Rock Crew itself. That particular organization aligned itself under an umbrella of a larger, more traditional street gang called Sex, Money, Murder, Bloods. They adopted the nomenclature.
Hold on, y'all. I gotta play my music, my money music. Thank you, Brandy, for my lunch tomorrow. I appreciate everything that you do for me. I appreciate you, but I gotta play my money song. Hold on, y'all. Because this is how much I appreciate her doing what she just did for me. 1 second. This is for you, Brandy. God bless you. I pray God gives you 1,000-fold of what you have given to me. Thank you.
They would do things like replace C's in words with the letter B, because traditionally Crips and Bloods were not aligned with one another. So Cleveland Avenue became Cleveland. Some of you may have indicated during voir dire you've heard or are familiar with the Cleveland Avenue area. Maybe you've even heard of Cleveland Avenue Day. The evidence will show that this is where that comes from. The evidence will also show that sometime in 2012 or thereabouts, an internal rift or divide occurred among the members of Rock Crew. Now, the defendant, Jeffrey Williams, seated back there yawning right now, he was an original member of Rock Crew. And the kind of crimes that Rock Crew did consisted of smash and grab burglaries, stealing ATM machines, things of that nature. When Rock Crew split up, YSL, or Young Slime Life, was formed. And the defendant, Jeffrey Williams, was its proclaimed leader. Young Slime Life came about and consisted of 3 or more people when it began. 3 or more people who were willing to and who did commit criminal street gang activity, that is crimes, that were intended to further the purposes and advance the directives of YSL itself. Now, there will be no evidence of a written contract or anything like that. You won't see bylaws of YSL, because this was a group of people associated in fact, who used common identifiers, common names, common colors, common symbols to communicate with one another and to express themselves to the rest of the world. So YSL, as the evidence will show, they didn't move individually. The members and associates of YSL, they moved like a pack, with the defendant Jeffrey Williams as its head. You'll hear from witnesses, both law enforcement and lay witnesses, who personally experienced and who personally witnessed the activities, the crimes that were committed. You will hear from law enforcement officers like Kimberly Underwood and Tyrone Dennis, whose main goal wasn't to go out in the streets and lock up people who looked like them. It was actually to touch souls in the streets, to touch young people, and to alert them of the dangers and the drawbacks of becoming a part of and becoming involved in gangs like YSL and Rock Crew. You'll hear about conversations with educators. You'll hear from members and associates of the gang itself. Now, as to how those members and associates will respond or act once they're actually in court and on the stand, that's something that I am truthfully not able to predict to you fully. But the court has given you instructions on determining and judging the credibility of the witnesses. And I trust that all of you will in fact follow those instructions. The evidence will show that YSL checks all of the boxes for being a criminal street gang. As I stated earlier, they are 3 or more people associated in fact. Their members commit crimes on behalf of the gang. They commit crimes such as armed robbery, hijacking, motor vehicle theft, theft by receiving, stolen firearms, so many stolen firearms, possession of a machine gun, and narcotic sales. And last but certainly not least, murder. What you will not hear any evidence of is that the defendants were not involved in a criminal street gang. You will not hear any evidence that they did not commit crimes on behalf of YSL. And as I stated to you earlier, what I'm saying to you now is
Let me object to that statement, please, as burden shifting.
Object basis?
Burden shifting. And under Parker versus the state at 277.
Why don't we take that up and
39.
I'll note your objection. I'm sustaining the objection. Why don't you rephrase, madam?
yes, Your Honor.
Just rephrase it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to explain to you at the appropriate time, ladies and gentlemen, what the burden is in this case. Remember what I told you earlier, that the burden never shifts to the defendants to prove or certain innocence, they're presumed innocent. And it's only until you hear evidence that you decide is sufficient, and I'll instruct you on how you're supposed to do that at a later point in time, okay? All right.
The evidence will show that YSL did not adhere and does not adhere to all of the customs of a traditional street gang. And the fact that YSL does not mirror all the customs of a criminal street gang, the evidence will show makes it no less a criminal street gang. The defendants on trial here today have, through their actions, displayed not only their allegiance, their alliance with one another and with the gang itself. Through their actions, they have displayed an unspoken agreement to participate in that gang through a pattern of illegal activities. And again, the head of this gang is seated in this courtroom too. The last paragraph of that poem that I read, that spoke to you earlier, goes as follows. Because of his age and his cunning, because of his right.
This
and
is
his
argument. This is not,
What's your objection, Mr. Harvey?
that it's argument.
Okay, Mr. Harvey, hold on. Madam, it is argument at this point in time, so I'll
Yes, sir.
sustain the objection, okay?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
The evidence will show that these defendants, that the members and associates of YSL, they knew who their leader was, and they knew the repercussions of not obeying their leader. You will hear evidence that when members and associates of YSL got in trouble, got locked up, the first person they called was either this defendant or one of his family members. Now, they didn't call him directly because he knew and they knew that he needed to have distance between himself and the crimes members and associates of YSL were committing on behalf of the gang. So they would reach out to his sister and have his sister reach out to somebody else and eventually get back to King Slime, as they call him.
Yeah, that one has been dispelled because if you guys know, when the sister called, she was in a relationship with that particular guy, right? So it had nothing to do with Jeffrey.
You will hear evidence that members of YSL committed armed robberies. You'll hear evidence that to slime someone is to do them dirty, and that sometimes members of YSL committed crimes against other family members of their fellow gang members. You'll hear evidence that when one of the associates or members of YSL did something to what Jeffrey Williams had perhaps considered a friend, they were threatened with their very life. Tell them to get that stuff back or they will be killed. You'll hear evidence that YSL, they had opposition within the city of Atlanta and Fulton County. That there were other gangs that were at various points in time at odds and even at war with YSL. One of those gangs was known as the IF gang, IF, Inglewood Family. You will hear experts come in here and tell you more about how the Inglewood family bloods in any way made its way down to Fulton County. You will also hear evidence about how one of the members, one of the beloved, of whom YSL considered an opposition group, was gunned down. Donovan Thomas on January the 1st, 2015. January the 10th, my apologies. 2015. Gunned down. Openly and notoriously. Because the evidence will show that part of the reasons that criminal street gangs operate the way that they do is to establish dominance and to establish control and to establish fear. You're going to hear that this gang stole at least 3 lives from this community over the last 10 years. At least 3 that are referenced in this indictment. You'll find that as a result of this gang's activities, a young woman who had nothing to do with either YSL or any of their opposition was gunned down by people trying to get back at YSL for what they did. You'll hear evidence that after the murder of Donovan Thomas, no less than 50 shootings occurred over the course of the next several months. You'll hear evidence that hundreds of bullets were fired into cars, into homes, and into people as a result of the rift Young's limelight had with other people in the community. So what are they accused of, and what are you here for today? The judge read the 4-hour-long indictment to you 12 months ago. He didn't read it to you again today, but he generally gave you what each defendant is being charged with and what the state has the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt as it relates to each defendant. But just to broadly touch on those, the crimes that the state is proving to you over the next several weeks include conspiracy to violate the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. That is an absolute mouthful. So we'll just say RICO. There's no substantive allegation of RICO violations here. And by that I mean there's a difference. Here the state is alleging that these defendants, they had an agreement, unspoken, but no less an agreement, to obtain property, things of value, cell phones, cars, stolen guns, through a pattern of illegal activity. The evidence will show that it's sort of like if two people said, okay, you know what, we're gonna go toilet paper our dean of admissions house. And they sat there thinking and talking about it, and someone overheard them and went and reported them to the police. And the police came and said, okay, I'm gonna arrest you all for conspiracy, for planning to go and do this. The evidence will show that it's not enough that they were planning to do it. Somebody has to do at least one thing in order for those two people to be found guilty of conspiracy. So say one of you goes and says, let me go get the toilet paper now. Then y'all are in trouble. That's what we have here, and that's what the evidence is going to show. There was an agreement among the members of YSL to obtain property and things of value through a pattern of illegal activity. And it is their actions over the course of the last 10 years. It did not stop, by the way, in 2015. It didn't stop at all. It continued up through and even into 2023, after this case was indicted, as the evidence will show. But their actions are what the state will be looking to you to evaluate and determine. Does this action show that they are agreeing to participate in this organization, this enterprise, through racketeering activity? You'll see evidence, as I stated, of not just drug sales, trap houses, drug houses, whole houses out of which drug sales were conducted, where they held long-arm guns by the door, where they stood ready to act on command if either one of their number called. Who's on trial before you today is Rodelius Ryan, Quamarius Nichols, Marquavius Huey, Jeffrey Williams, Shannon Stillwell, Diamante Kendrick, and their actions during the dates that are listed in this indictment are what we are asking that you pay close attention to and you evaluate.
Your Honor.
It-
You have an objection?
Yes, sir.
Basis.
For the motion.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of our breaks. I'm going to need to probably ask you to retire to your headquarters at your deliberation room, and we'll call you back in just a minute, okay, when we finish up our business, all right?
All right, so that was the first part of the opening argument. Hold on a second, guys. Let me stop sharing for a second and go back to you guys. And it's going to be her part 2 of hers. Okay, hold on a second. Okay, here we go. Let me go ahead and share this one here. Okay, here we go.
Doing all of that, they happen upon lyrics. Investigating, they're finding out who committed it. And after doing all of that, they happen upon lyrics. Lyrics that have an uncanny similarity to very true and very real and quite specific events, as the evidence will show. Jeffrey Williams' words that he promotes through songs with beats behind them, they aren't random. He tells you, as the evidence will show, take this shit to motherfucking trial. I rep my life for real. For slimes, you know I kill. Trial, I done beat it twice, Kendricks. I'm undefeated, like feds came and snatched me. I don't know, no point in asking. I was on what? Bleeding. Stuck like a magnet, bitch ass nigga. I shoot at your man, you need to stand down. I up my stamina, take it to trial. Get an appeal, take it to trial. Yeah, you're gonna whack them. Pay for that casket, that's just if we whack them. My young niggas pulling up. Bentleys, Austin Martins, Rares and Teslas strapped with an FN. You're gonna hear a lot about FNs. FNs galore. From here to 2015, FNs all throughout the incidents that are involving gang members YSL. Watch me whack that bitch. Pop him like assist. Glock with the assist. Incidentally, the gun at the home of Jeffrey Williams on May of 2022 that had been modified with that switch, it was a Glock. Again, we didn't chase the murders. We didn't chase the lyrics, rather solve the murders. We chased the murders, as the evidence will show, and in the process, we just found the lyrics. Jeffrey Williams' words and actions further reflect his agreement to participate in this organization through this criminal activity. He tells you, we committing them crimes. Hop out and shoot. Roll one up for the gang. He's not using gang colloquially. The evidence will show he's telling you they are a gang. You want to be slime? Children of Fulton County, go catch you a body. Me and Lil Bro. The evidence.
How would you expect the evidence to show, madam?
It is indeed, Your Honor.
All right, I will rule the objection.
The evidence will show that when Jeffrey Williams is saying me and Little Bro, we used to steal from the store, we had to stick it and go. He's talking about himself. The evidence will show that this is the man, through the music, that he has been blessed with the opportunity to be able to release and gain wealth from. Through that music, through that blessing, the evidence will show that Jeffrey Williams led the group of people that wreaked utter havoc on Fulton County. Jeffrey Williams' words and actions, as the evidence will show to the members of his gang, you'll hear in a conversation he has with them, y'all ain't beat him up or shot him yet, y'all ain't getting soft. The evidence will show that there's no place or need for that kind of edict or statement when all you're doing is making music. And to clarify and put a very clear and fine point on it, the evidence will show that no one is attempting to take away from Mr. Williams the fact that he has had a lucrative rap career. The evidence is simply being put before you to show that he is guilty of committing the crimes that are laid out in this indictment. That he and his fellow YSL gang members and associates on trial before you now agreed to participate in this organization through the illicit, illegal activity listed in this indictment. And that they further committed all the other crimes listed in the indictment beyond count one. Because as you'll see, count one consists of 191 overt acts. Acts that aren't all crimes, they're just acts. But counts 2 through 65, the ones that have these defendants' names on them, are the ones you're here to evaluate whether or not the state has proved. Actions and words, words and actions. The evidence will show that this was Donovan Thomas in life, that on January 10th at 2:15, about 7 o'clock in the evening, Donovan Thomas was living his best life. He was up at the barbershop at 330 McDaniel Street. He had paid for a bunch of people, a bunch of kids to get their haircut, and you'll see that he is out there enjoying himself. The last actions that he took while he was fully alive and healthy, joking with his friends. You'll see that they didn't even see it coming. You'll see evidence that Donovan Thomas was literally in the middle of lapping it up with his friends when a car drives by and opens fire on him and whoever else might have been in close proximity to him. The evidence will show that this act wasn't done secretly, it was done openly, notoriously, almost as if to send a message. We did it. The evidence will show everybody knew who did it, because it wasn't done secretly. The evidence will show that this act didn't happen in a vacuum. There were things that led up to it. An argument at Club Crucial or Club Brucial, as my defendants may like to say, that involved a YSL associate by the name of Kenneth Copeland and a member of a rival gang. Kenneth Copeland gets jumped. He's flashing money because that's what they do. It's ladies fight night and they're out there flashing money. Kenneth Copeland gets jumped. Diamante Kendrick jumps into action, goes to Kenneth Copeland's defense, punches out a member of the opposition, and then shots are fired. Shell casings. Shell casings are all throughout the evidence that you'll see and hear in this case. Remnants of the violence inflicted on this county by YSL and its actions. Shell casings are fired in between January the 6th and 7th of 2015 and January the 10th. Other incidents take place and may lead to the ultimate gunning down of Jonathan Thomas. As the evidence will show, in the ensuing months, there were a series of shootings and retaliatory shootings. Most notably, the mother of rapper Rayshawn Bennett gets shot. Her house is shot up twice. She gets shot one time. And the evidence will show that there is not always cooperation, because there is a code that people adhere to when this type of violence is surrounding them. No snitching. So the evidence will show that even as people were getting shot, even as people were bleeding, even as people were being taken to the hospital to have their wounds attended to, they weren't always forthcoming. They weren't always willing to talk to and to trust law enforcement, not even if it would serve their own purposes. The evidence will show that members of YSL ultimately, as a result of those shootings and retaliatory shootings, ballistics or firearms matches started coming back to various people. And then one YSL member, Quindarius Zachary, he gets caught with a gun. The shell casings from that gun go to match some of these shootings. Quindarius Zachary is caught. He starts telling. The evidence will show that Quindarius Zachary was a straw purchaser for YSL. A straw purchaser is nothing more than somebody who goes and gets guns for somebody who's not supposed to have them. And that's what Quindarius Zachary did. Firearms found in the hands of Kenneth Copeland led to further revelations to the police and law enforcement. The evidence will show members of YSL were so eager, so gangster about acting on behalf of and in the protection of the defendant Jeffrey Williams and YSL, that when Wayne Carter, otherwise known as Lil Wayne, came to town to perform at the compound while the defendant Jeffrey Williams was performing in Lil Wayne's hometown, according to word from the people that talk getting booed at the time, members of YSL show up at the compound, locked and loaded with guns. Evidence will show that security knew to be on the lookout for members of YSL. The authorities were alerted to ongoing public rifts and back and forth between the defendant, Jeffrey Williams, and members of his gang, and statements being made publicly on social media about, towards, and threatening Wayne Carter. So when Tyrone Dennis, who is working an extra job, he is a law enforcement officer. At the time, he was an investigator with the Atlanta Police Department gang unit. So when he's there working his extra job, and he sees Walter Murphy, one of the founding members of YSL, show up with the defendant's sisters and Trontavia Stevens, and ultimately Jimmy Winfrey with guns, When he sees Walter Murphy try to secret a gun underneath the wheel well of a car, he calls him out. He's like, what are you doing? Walter Murphy's like, oh, hey. Evidence will show that the YSL gang members that showed up at the compound that night were not allowed entry into Lil Wayne's concert, his venue. So what they did was they waited until Lil Wayne leaves, gets in his tour bus, and is attempting to leave the area. They get up beside the tour bus and they unload bullets into the man's tour bus. Bullets. For nothing, except to show their dominance. There will be no evidence that Lil Wayne threatened either of them that night. But that act on the part of Jimmy Winfrey and the defendants before you today, that act was intended to show their solidarity, their willingness to act on the behalf of, their willingness to exact violence upon anyone who threatened the position of the criminal street gang calling itself Young Limelight. You'll hear evidence that after being arrested, or actually when he was approached back in 2014 about an armed robbery he allegedly committed, YSL member and associate Trontavia Stevens was seen bearing tattoos on his hands, ROCCREW, Cleveland Avenue. And that on his side, he had YSL. And Detective Mark Belknap inquired of him, what's that? Bill Belknap knew because he had been working the streets of Atlanta for a long time. He was familiar with Right Crew. But as gang investigators, they're taught to interact with and talk to people when they see indicia of criminal street gang activity. You'll hear that Trontavia Stevens told Belknap, well, Right Crew is a name we used to call ourselves. Then we started going by YSL, which stands for Young Limelight, or it did stand for Young Limelight. But then, when my friend Jeffrey Williams started becoming successful, we changed that name to Young Successful Life. The words of a member of the gang himself. The only time, as the evidence will show, that members of YSL don't want to call themselves and acknowledge that they are in fact a gang is when it would be to their detriment. The evidence will show that any other day of the week, they are loudly and proudly promoting their criminal activities. Jonathan Thomas, he was driving this Chevrolet Tahoe the night he was gunned down. The evidence will show that this location here is the barbershop right up from the Texaco at the corner of McDaniel and Northside Drive in Atlanta, Fulton County. We asked you during voir dire, you heard us say, how many of you are familiar with this area? This is that area. The evidence will show that that is the way that Donovan Thomas looked last time his loved ones saw him. That his life was swallowed up in that crater created by YSL in the Cleveland Avenue community. And the words that they found while looking into this murder, spoken by members of YSL. We don't speak about shit on wax, but indeed they do, as the evidence will show. They just kind of thinly veil it. We are known to kill the biggest cats of all kitties. Donovan Thomas in the community, he was a big homie. He was a friend to a lot of people. He was a big deal. And it touched a lot of people, as the evidence will show, when his life was taken. The words that were spoken, we known to kill the biggest cats of all kitties. How coincidental that Donovan Thomas was gunned down. And these were the words later spoken by members of YSL. The evidence will show that it's not coincidental at all. 100 rounds in a Tahoe. 100 rounds in a Tahoe. The evidence will show that the lyrics released by YSL members, the lyrics they chose to speak, they bore a very eerie significance to real life. 100 rounds in a Tahoe. And you'll see that Donovan Thomas's Tahoe had bullet defects all along the back of it when they sprayed Donovan Thomas and his car on January the 10th of 2015. This that slime shit, killing 12 shit. The evidence will show that 12 is the word that is commonly used to denote law enforcement. And speaking of the young people whose innocence and whose lives were swallowed up by that crater created by YSL, Christian Evinger. He's not before you today, but he is a co-conspirator of these defendants. He is a YSL member and associate who got YSL tattooed on his face at the tender age of 15. He repped YSL continuously and notoriously throughout his social media. The evidence will show that at the age of 16, he, along with an accomplice, robbed a young woman by the name of Taravia Hill at gunpoint in front of her child. And that at his sentencing hearing, Taravia Hill, seeing a young black boy, who could have been her brother, cousin, she actually advocated for Christian Evinger's lenient sentencing. So Christian Evinger, he wasn't sentenced on what he was originally charged with. With the acquiescence of the victim, Christian Evinger received a lesser sentence. He went to prison for a short time, and within less than a year, he committed an armed robbery. And when law enforcement officers are out there looking for Christian Evinger, who incidentally constantly posted on social media with the guns and his gang signs and the green emojis with the gun pointing to the camera or to some other emoji talking about how he reps hard for YSL. When law enforcement officers, specifically a law enforcement officer just 30 years old by the name of Officer Rogers, when they go to apprehend Christian Evinger on this armed robbery he committed after being released from prison, having robbed Taravia Hill, they do everything they can to take him in without causing any harm to Christian Evinger. But you will see that while he's being taken into custody, what Christian Evinger does, he takes the firearm of this young officer. He pulls it out of the holster and he fires, putting 7 bullets in Officer Rogers. The evidence will show leaving a law enforcement officer with PTSD after he has tried to humanely apprehend a member of YSL. The evidence will show that this person depicted here is Quantavious Greer, also an associate, but perhaps more importantly, the brother of the defendant, Jeffrey Williams. Christian Evinger was so deeply entrenched, ingrained with loyal to YSL. He's even posting free bitch as Quintavious Greer served a sentence for murder. Who said they want smoke? Christian Eppinger, as he's calling himself YSL Briss. Note that Chris does not start with the letter B, but it does when you're associating yourself with a criminal street gang who aligns itself with the Bloods. And that's the tattoo that Christian Eppinger on the side of his face proudly publicized on June 27, 2015. He wasn't even 16 yet. New ink with the green snake emoji and a red heart. The evidence will show that though you'll hear over and over the names of the 6 people on trial before you today, that the 6 people on trial before you are not the people who were most viciously affected by the acts of this criminal street gang. The evidence will show how far members of YSL are and were willing to go to act immediately on behalf of each other. Dexter Montgomery, minding his business, happened to drive in just a little too closely behind another YSL associate, who then phoned up the gang who was posted up at the trap house. And in minutes, 2 more YSL associates showed up with a long gun and handguns. Dexter Montgomery had no idea he was about to lose half of his head that day. As Dexter Montgomery left the gas station, 2 YSL associates followed behind him. And as he stopped at a red light, they opened fire. Miraculously, the evidence will show that Dexter Montgomery survived, but literally half of his head is gone. You'll hear from and see Dexter Montgomery during the course of this trial. The evidence will show that after that happened, law enforcement, at first it wasn't the gang unit, but the gang unit recognized some of the players, Walter Murphy, other members of YSL. And so they began to assist in the investigation. And they learned the YSL gang members said, we got a call that one of us needed some help. He didn't know who this was pulling up behind him, so we just responded. You'll hear that investigators, Gaither and Dennis, said, well, wait a minute, did you know what you were responding to? They're like, no, we don't have to know. If our boy needs help, we're gonna respond. They said, well, where'd you get the gun? Oh, they're by the door of the trap house that we were in. They're just there, ready for us to use when we need to. Their words, I can't make it up. The evidence will show that actions of YSL gang members and associates on behalf of their leader when they felt someone disrespected Jeffrey Williams or any other member of their pack, they made threats. Not quiet, whisper threats, loud, public threats with wide, vivid displays of firearms. We're not going back and forth. This got to be some Biggie and Tupac shit and shooting up Wayne Carter's tour bus. The evidence will show that all of those actions, they're not elements of the offenses that are charged in the indictment. We don't have to show those things in order for you to find them guilty, but the evidence will show that those things prove the existence of the conspiracy, of the agreement itself. the agreement on the part of these defendants and other charged and uncharged co-conspirators to be a part of this organization known as Young Slime Life through a pattern of this illegal activity outlined in the indictment. There are numerous victims that you're going to hear about. Shannon Stillwell is another defendant who is before you, being accused of various crimes in this indictment. Shannon Stillwell is alleged by one of his own crew, by another YSL, two other YSL members, to have been one of the gunmen who took the life of Donovan Thomas. The evidence will show that Shannon Stillwell was arrested. He was arrested after some investigation by the Atlanta Police Department. The evidence will show that the information initially relied on by that first arresting officer, it didn't pan out to be actually accurate. So when the case got to the district attorney's office, more investigation was conducted. The evidence will show that the office didn't just take the word of the person who originally identified certain people as having committed the murder of Donovan Thomas. Instead, as the evidence will show, what our office did was dig to find out whether the people who were talking were actually in a position and a place to know the stuff that they talked about. And what they learned was that that person originally relied on by Investigator Thorpe, that person was just lying. And so the people that Investigator Thorpe originally arrested on the Donovan Thomas murder, they were released at various times on bond as the office continued to investigate further. The evidence will show that our office did not just stop at the word of one YSL member. The evidence will show that yet another accomplice corroborated the words of the first YSL member that talked. The evidence will show that cell phone records further corroborated the information law enforcement was getting from these people. And ultimately, Shannon Stillwell, Demonte Kendrick, Justin Cobb, Javoris Bradford, they were all indicted in this particular instrument that you'll have for your consideration. But the only two people who are in front of you for you now to determine whether or not the state has met his burden are Demonte Kendrick and Shannon Stillwell as it relates to Donovan Thomas's murder. However, between the time that this indictment came down and the time that our office decided, no, we need to look into this investigation some more, Shannon Stillwell was released from jail. But he had to wear an ankle monitor as a condition of his bond. The evidence will show that during the time in 2015, after a lot of arrests were made following the murder of Donovan Thomas, that the violence in Fulton County, the gun violence that had continued over the course of that year, it kind of subsided a little bit.
Basis.
Argument.
I sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. The evidence will show that around 2019, 2020, law enforcement investigators, they started noticing some activity on the part of gang members. They started paying particular attention. One of those investigators was investigator Marissa Vigorito. You'll see and hear from investigator Vigorito, and you'll learn that one of her jobs as a law enforcement officer, one of her background experiences was that she was a probation officer, so she had a lot of information about a lot of YSL gang members. You'll hear that initially, after Shamel Drinks was gunned down, Detective Hogan with the Atlanta Police Department, he didn't have any leads. As a matter of fact, he came back to the precinct lamenting the fact that he had no leads on this homicide that just occurred at Windsor and the I-20 entrance ramp. Young man killed, gunned down inside his car. When investigator Vigorito began talking to Detective Hogan, she saw that Detective Hogan did have some footage from the gas station right up from that location. And that investigator Hogan was looking to find the people in the gas station because that gas station was the last place that Shamel Drinks was seen alive. One of the people in the surveillance footage was wearing a very distinct hoodie and coat. And as it would happen, investigator Vigorito had hours earlier been at a Waters Road location, one of YSL's hangouts. As the evidence will show, a place from which they conducted transactions. And that the Waters Road address had been shot up, and investigator Vigorito happened upon Shannon Stillwell and other members of YSL in the same outfit he was seen in the surveillance video on at the time Shamel Drinks was inside the gas station. The evidence will show that further investigation revealed that Shannon Stillwell was wearing an ankle monitor at the time that Shamel Drinks was gunned down. And that ankle monitor put him right there at the place that Shamel Drinks took his last breath. The evidence will show that in this murder, much like in the Donovan Thomas murder, there was a rental car involved. A rental car which these defendants had gone and gotten the windows blacked out, tinted on earlier the day that Shamel Drinks was gunned down. Tinted the windows of a rental car. The evidence will show that it was to evade being seen by the opposition. The evidence will show that as a result of all of this violence and activity, during the midst of it all, investigator Vigorito had secured a wiretap for Demekion Darlington, YSL gang member and associate. She was able to listen and detect hours of the goings on of the enterprise. She learned throughout the course of her own investigation and during her time looking into YSL that a rival gang member, Rayshawn Bennett, ended up at the Fulton County Jail at the same time YSL gang member J.D. Meyer was there. The evidence will show that J.D. Meyer, upon seeing Lucci, reaches out to get permission from King's Line to take Bougie out. The evidence will show that Jaden Myrick actually endeavored to stab Rayshawn Bennett to death, but that he was unsuccessful. The evidence will further show that Jaden Myrick wasn't the only one reaching out to this defendant, Jeffrey Williams, for permission to commit a homicide. Looking at Shannon Stillwell's words along with his actions, happening upon the lyrics while trying to solve the murder, the evidence will show that law enforcement found one nugget spoken by Shannon Stillwell. I just beat a murder rap, paid my lawyer $30 for that, after he was released on bond for the murder of Diamond Thomas, and before he actually took the life of Shamel Drinks. The evidence will show that the young man on the left is Shamel Drinks in life, and that the photograph on the right is what was left of Shamel Drinks after YSL and the crater it created in the middle of the Cleveland Avenue community took that life from his family, friends, and loved ones. I said a lot, and I'm not the only one you get to hear from today. So you might be happy, I'm about to sit down. I want to ask you to make use of those notepads and those pencils that you have in your possession. The court's already given you the instruction, take notes. Rely on your memory. Use the notes to document and help you remember after you've heard weeks and weeks and weeks and scores of witnesses who said what. I expect that as you listen to and evaluate witnesses who come in to testify, there will be witnesses who you discover changed their stories from the time they first made a statement to the time they actually had to appear here in court, in public, and tell them folks. I expect that the evidence will show that there are some witnesses you will assess are just scared. Some are embarrassed, some are intimidated, some don't want to remember, some just plain don't remember. The court alone gives you the law on how to deal with and how to assess those witnesses. I only ask that you follow closely the instructions that the court gives you. Look at who the witnesses are. Look at who they look at while they're on the stand. They don't look at or won't look at while on the stand. Look at how they answer questions posed to them from the state versus questions posed to them from the defense. And if the occasion arises that you find that a witness as presented in court says something different than what they said previously, you determine why it is you believe that they said something different once they got in court. Words and actions. The defendant's actions coupled with their words. They prove the existence of the enterprise. Their actions and their words, the evidence will show, proves their agreement to participate in this enterprise through these illegal activities outlined in the indictment. Preserving, protecting, enhancing the reputation, power, and territory of the enterprise through acts including murder, assault, and threats of violence are what the evidence will show these defendants did over the last 10 years. The evidence will show that the violence didn't stop in 2015. Preserving, protecting, and enhancing the reputation, power, territory of the enterprise by the posting of messages, images, videos, and songs demonstrating their allegiance to the enterprise and a willingness to engage in violence on its behalf are what you'll see evidence of over the course of the next several weeks. Maintaining armed individuals, ready and willing to preserve, protect, and enhance the reputation, power, and territory of the enterprise through the use of violence. It's what the witnesses and the evidence you will see. Obtaining money and other property through illegal activities like robbery, theft, and illegal drug sales and distribution. And obstructing law enforcement, killing 12 shit. Investigations and court proceedings through witness intimidation and attacks upon law enforcement officers. You'll see it for yourself. The children whose innocence this organization claimed as its own. And in the end, the evidence is going to show you that YSL is a RICO enterprise, nothing fancy about it. The evidence is going to show you that it's also a criminal street gang. Those two are not mutually exclusive. That these defendants participated in this enterprise in a way that had nothing at all to do with the record label, except maybe their actions as reflected in their songs made their music more real and perhaps more appealable to somebody. The evidence will show that the defendants, they talk about YSL while they talk about the crimes they committed. And while they talk about the crimes they're going to commit, you'll see that this evidence proves that YSL is a criminal organization. The defendants have been associating together for many years, committing crimes together against the general public, against rival gang members, as the evidence will show, against law enforcement, and against each other. The evidence will show they agreed, they willingly participated in these activities. In the end, the court has told you and will tell you again that you are to evaluate the evidence and apply that the law the court gives to you to that evidence and render a verdict that speaks the truth. I expect that at the close of this evidence, you'll see that the defendant's presence, companionship, and conduct during all of these illegal activities, their words and their actions not only show the existence of the criminal enterprise called YSL, it also shows the conspiracy. And in the end, we're gonna all come back and make our arguments to you. But the one thing that I'm gonna be doing, our team will be doing, is asking you to uphold your duty and render a verdict, the only verdict that speaks the truth, and find these defendants guilty of each and every crime listed on this indictment alleged against them. Thank you.
All right, that was the her opening argument. You guys say y'all wanted to see Kendrick's, right? And then after that, I'm gonna end it. Whose argument did you want? Opening argument? You said you wanted not Weinstein, but the other one, right? Which one did you? Because Steele is gonna be long, so I'm not gonna play Steele's. Y'all wanted J's, right? Did y'all want J's? Where's Pastor? He's probably sleeping. Who did you want? You want J's? Okay. Let me go ahead and do J's. All right, hold on. J apps. Okay, here we go. Hey, Tasha. All right, let's go from the beginning.
It is more important that innocence be protected than it is that guilt be punished. For guilt and crimes are so frequent in this world. That's a quote from the man who wrote into our Constitution what the presumption of innocence means. His name was John Adams. He was the second president of the United States, right after George Washington. Why is that quote important? Why is the presumption of innocence important? Why did that get included in our great Constitution? Because we want to make sure that we don't accidentally send innocent people to prison. Innocent people don't get punished. I have the great honor of representing Diamante Kendrick, who's sitting in the gray vest at council table with me, along with my co-counsel, Doug Weinstein. Doug, stand up so everyone can see you. Also, you'll meet or hear from, at times, Katie Hingerty. She was here yesterday. She was the tall woman, blonde hair. And the three of us have the great honor and privilege of defending Mr. Kendrick. I've been practicing law here in Atlanta for almost 30 years, exclusively representing innocent people like Mr. Kendrick. He is not guilty. He is not guilty of every accusation and every count in the indictment that the state alleges. Let me say it a third time, just so you're clear.
Uh-oh.
He is not
guilty
of every single charge against him. He is presumed innocent, as our great Constitution demands. And we won't have to prove anything to you, as the judge told you. The burden will always lie on the state, and boy, is it a high burden, beyond reasonable doubt. Now, it's not a mathematical certainty. The judge, Judge Granville, is a great judge, by the way, and very smart, and knows the law really well. He will instruct you as to all the law. None of the lawyers will. But that beyond a reasonable doubt standard is a tough standard for them to meet. And the evidence in this case against my client is so very weak. The state's not going to be able to come anywhere near the standard required. My client, Mr. Kendrick, grew up here in Atlanta in a tough neighborhood. He did not come from money. He was poor, hungry, deprived, socioeconomically disadvantaged. But he had a loving mother, a mother who's been with him the entire time of this case and will be every day. And she made sure that he had the best upbringing that he could. You heard Mr. Steele earlier talk about the disadvantage of how Mr. Williams was brought up, and my client had a similar upbringing. It was tough. Food, clothing were sparse. But he dreamt of a better life for himself and for his family. And through hard work, through creativity, maybe a little luck and fortitude, he became a very successful musical artist, a rapper. Now, despite Mr. Kendrick's mom's best efforts, he did get into some trouble. And we acknowledge that. We don't hide from it. We don't skirt it. Mr. Kendrick, you'll find out, went to prison between 2015 and 2020. So the state is actually limited because during those years, he's locked up. He can't possibly be committing any crimes they've alleged. You'll also hear that he pled guilty to a crime right here in Fulton County in 2017 while he was locked up. And he admits that wrongdoing. He owns it. He paid his debt to society. But he also worked hard and obtained success in the music industry. And not just for fame or money. Mr. Kendrick did it because he wanted to give back to his community, a community that was disadvantaged. And that's exactly what he did when he got successful. He did tremendous civic duty. You'll hear evidence that he volunteered, he helped coach a youth football team, and he gave back to his community. He gave back because he knew it was the right thing to do. Now the state, and the evidence will show, the state, the police, and the prosecution want to use Mr. Kendrick's past. They put it in the indictment. Despite having paid his debt to society, the state is going to use his prior conviction to try to bootstrap these old crimes that he's already paid his debt for to get you, to convince you that he's guilty of these new offenses. They're going to try to get a second bite of the apple, despite the fact that he served his time, that he pled guilty. They want you to find him guilty again because of a debt he's already paid. And that's not right. They can't prove, using actual evidence in this case, the new crimes that they're alleging in the indictment, so they have to get you to pay attention to the old past he left behind. The evidence will show that he is not guilty of the charges in the indictment, and that the police and the prosecution's case is so incredibly weak. But they have to distract you with the old Mr. Kendrick, the Mr. Kendrick that paid his debt and pled guilty and served his time. It's like a bad magic trick. You ever see a bad magician who's like, look over here, while they're picking your pocket? That's the evidence the state wants you to pay attention to. I've been involved in a lot of RICO and murder cases in my career, in almost 30 years of doing this job. But the judge told you, and the prosecution told you, this case is unique, different. Why? It's going to take months. There are going to be hundreds of witnesses. It is massive. It's definitely the biggest case that any of us have ever been in. Maybe the biggest case in the history of the state of Georgia. Why is that? Lots of murder cases, gang cases, RICO cases take 1, 2, maybe 3 weeks to try at most. Why is this case going to take months? I'll tell you why. Because the evidence will show the government has got to drag in hundreds of witnesses to dance around the weak actual case that they have. They've got to bring in 5 experts to tell you what a gang is. They've got to bring in an expert to tell you what an Infinity is, an Infinity automobile. They've got to bring in dozens and dozens of witnesses that are not going to say, Mr. Kendrick committed a murder. Mr. Kendrick possessed or sold drugs. Mr. Kendrick possessed illegal firearms. They're going to tell you everything under the sun that dances around the facts and hope that after hundreds and hundreds of witnesses, you're either so confused or so worn down that you'll believe the state's theory. If the case were direct and the evidence were true, it wouldn't take long to try. Because they bring to court someone to say, I saw Mr. Kendrick kill Donovan Thomas. They don't have that. And we're going to talk about what else they don't have, but they don't have enough evidence to prove my client guilty of any of these charges. And so to put lipstick on a pig, they've got
And not the lipstick on the pig.
bury you with hundreds of witnesses that won't tell you that my client's guilty beyond reasonable doubt. Why not bring in someone to say, Mr. Kendrick's fingerprints were on a firearm. Mr. Kendrick's fingerprints were on a bag of drugs. Mr. Kendrick's fingerprints were in the Infinity that was used to kill Donovan Thomas. Mr. Kendrick's DNA was present at the scene of the crime. Why not bring in one witness out of the hundreds that you're going to hear from that will just say, I saw Mr. Kendrick do it? Why not? Because it doesn't exist. And our Constitution and our set of laws and our democracy demand more. They demand that high standard. You may not like Mr. Kendrick or any of these other defendants, but we are not here for a popularity contest. We are here to decide something so much more important. And the state doesn't have the evidence to do it. The evidence doesn't exist, not real concrete evidence. The evidence will show that the state is trying to find Mr. Kendrick guilty by association. That's what they want you to believe. Because they want you to find him guilty because who his friends are. The evidence will show that he had friends, that he knew people, that he associated with people. I thought in America, we had freedom of speech, freedom of association in the First Amendment. But the state wants to present evidence to show you that those freedoms are not true, that the Constitution does not matter. They want to present evidence that Mr. Kendrick is guilty by who he hangs out with, the color of the clothes that he wears, the symbols he makes with his hands, and the beautiful lyrics that he writes and sings. Those aren't actual crimes, that's just free speech. And that is what is on trial here, the First Amendment of the Constitution. They want you to look at evidence and say, these people are guilty because they exercise their right to free speech in America. That's not just wrong, it's un-American. Now, the evidence will show you in 2020 that when my client did get out of prison, due to his hard work, his talent, he became a famous rap star. Almost like find lottery. The chances of a young person going in the music industry and making it are very, very small. But that made him successful. He used his brain, his creativity, and his really hard work to make his family and his mother proud. And the government wants to punish him for that success. They told you in their opening argument to find him guilty because of overt acts. And they had the gall to tell you that those acts didn't even need to be crimes.
Objection.
Judge, that's what the evidence will show. That's what the state says the evidence will show. They told you that those overt acts don't even have to be crimes, but you should, as a result, find him guilty of criminal RICO. This isn't a civil trial, this is a criminal trial. And they told you he doesn't even need to commit a crime, but you should find him guilty of a crime. Does that make sense to you? Does 1 + 1 equal 3?
Objection. Misstatement. Argument.
I stand in issues. Ladies and gentlemen, disregard counsel's last remark.
What are the charges against? Thank you. What are the charges against Mr. Kendrick? The first and the biggest is a murder. We've heard a lot about the murder of Donovan Thomas already. Now, Donovan Thomas is not, and it's tragic, and murder is wrong. The state had the nerve to show you an autopsy photo in opening argument, not because they needed to prove that Donovan Thomas died, but to exaggerate and scare.
Objection, argument on what the evidence will show.
The evidence will
I'll sustain the objection.
clearly show that Donovan Thomas died. We concede that, and it's a tragic occurrence. And my client and his family grieve for the family of Mr. Thomas. We don't think it was acceptable. But my client had nothing to do with that man's death. He died because of a drive-by shooting at a barbershop on January 10th, 2015. And what happens next? The police arrest the wrong group of people. They admit they arrested the wrong group of people. You heard Mr. Sharp and Mr. Steele tell you about Kenneth Copeland and Demetrius Garlington and the others who were arrested for this crime. And the police charged them. And what is the evidence that turned out that those people got their charges dismissed and Mr. Kendrick got charged instead? Are there fingerprints of Mr. Kendrick on anywhere at the crime scene, on the body of Mr. Donovan, in the car that was used, on a firearm that was used? Are there fingerprints anywhere that tie my client to that crime? No. What about DNA? Is my client's DNA anywhere related to the death of Donovan Thomas? No. What about ballistics? Are you going to hear evidence that there was a match between the bullets or the gun used to kill Donovan Thomas that was a gun ever possessed by Diamante Kendrick? No. Are you going to hear from a single witness out of the hundreds of witnesses that are going to be brought here by the state? One. I beg you for one witness to come to court and stand right here on this witness stand and say to you, I saw Diamante Kendrick kill Donovan Thomas. Will that occur? And the answer is resoundingly no, because my client is not guilty, ladies and gentlemen. He's an innocent man, wrongfully accused of a murder he didn't commit. And if that doesn't get you upset, I don't know what will. It makes me angry. Not one witness. There's videotape that the state will present of an Infinity automobile driving by the barber shop and being used to kill Donovan Thomas. Are you going to hear witnesses that say my client owned the Infinity, rented the Infinity, leased the Infinity, was the rightful driver of the Infinity? Nope. Will you hear or see evidence to the contrary? Oh, yes, you will. Shortly before Donovan Thomas dies, the state has another video of my client getting into, are you ready? A Pontiac Bonneville. Not an Infinity, a Pontiac Bonneville. So, will you see evidence? Will the evidence show that my client is Superman and can fly through the sky from one car to another? No, you will not. He is not Superman. Maybe he's Mr. Spock and he can teleport. You will not hear evidence of his ability to teleport from one car to another either. And yet, the state claims he's guilty of murder. Now remember, you heard previously about a man named Nicholas Robinson, whose real name is Spencer Wright. He came in and told the police, and they made arrests of Mr. Copeland, Mr. Garlington, and others. The state's key witnesses. But you've also heard evidence that Mr. Copeland is a terrible liar and a terrible person himself, a gang member, not to be trusted and not to be believed. But that's the state's key witness who says, oh yeah, it wasn't me, it was Mr. Kendrick and others. Why do we know he's lying? Not just because his lips are moving, but because he was one of the people who was originally charged with the murder. How naive does the state have to think you are to not understand that the incentive for Mr. Copeland to lie is as simple as, I'm charged with the murder. If I say someone else did it, then I don't get charged with the murder. It's a ridiculous theory that they have, quite frankly. And the evidence is so super thin and super weak. It reminds me of nothing more than a Krispy Kreme donut. Thin air. In fact, Mr. Garlington, when he's interviewed by the police, says, yeah, I don't know who killed Donovan Thomas. They have no way to corroborate it. They have no actual evidence. The state wants you to buy into this theory of murder, and our Constitution demands you don't. They charged a bunch of people, the police, the Atlanta Police Department, figured out, oh, we messed up and got it wrong, but now we're going to charge a bunch of other people. But trust us this time. Does that imbue trust to you? Is that evidence that you'll hear about that seems trustworthy? No, it is not. That evidence is completely untrustworthy and unbelievable and unreliable. It's a bad magic trick. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses, no ballistics, and videotape that actually exonerates and proves that he's not guilty. Krispy Kreme donut hole. What's the next charge against my client? Well, there's a bunch of them involving guns. And 3, to be exact. One is that he's charged with possession of firearm during the commission of a felony. If you're committing some other felony, you're using a gun, you get charged as an extra charge. The second is possession of a machine gun. Ms. Love described to you, Mr. Steele described to you, what a fully automatic weapon is. Pull the trigger once, all the bullets fly. That's illegal. And the third is possession of firearm by a convicted felon. And yes, Mr. Kendrick's a convicted felon. So he's not allowed to possess a gun. And he knows that. And again, the indictment, we've talked a lot about the indictment. You're going to get it. It's a document. It's a long document. But the indictment charges my client with those 3 firearm charges, all stemming from one date, March 9th of 2022, the date that Mr. Kendrick is arrested. So what happens on March 9th of 2022? He's at a house owned by Jeffrey Williams, his friend and colleague, who he's made beautiful music with, wonderful music that's entertained millions of people. And at that house, and there's dozens and dozens of people at this house on the night of March 9th of 2022. It's not like there's 2 or 3 people there. Dozens. And there are guns in the house. So, how do we get to firearms being in the house to Mr. Kendrick possessing firearms? We don't. We don't. There's not going to be a single piece of evidence showing that Mr. Kendrick's fingerprints are on any of the guns. There's not going to be a single piece of evidence showing his DNA is on the guns. And quite frankly, you'll learn, and the evidence will show, there's something called touch DNA. What is that? You're going to learn that if I touch this table and my hand is here for a couple seconds, I don't just leave my fingerprints behind, I actually leave some of my DNA behind. And that can be tested, forensically tested by the police and by the GBI lab and the state of Georgia. So there's no fingerprints on the guns that belong to DeMonte Kendrick. There's no DNA. There's not a single person at the party or a single witness who says DeMonte Kendrick had any of these guns. No one is going to say he bought any of the guns. No one's going to say he sold any of the guns. No one is going to say he possessed any of the guns. But they're going to want to do a dirty magic trick and show you his past. He pled guilty to a gun offense years ago. And so he must have been possessing the guns. That's their theory. Assume and speculate to find him guilty. That's not what we do in this country. That's not what we do in a democracy. That's not what we do with our Constitution. And that's not what we do when someone's presumed innocent and has to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. One witness, please, that says DeMonte Kendrick was holding a firearm that night. DeMonte Kendrick bought one of the guns. DeMonte Kendrick used one of the guns. No one. No one's going to testify to that. And why is that? Because he didn't have any of those guns. He was at a house where there were guns. That doesn't mean he was in possession of illegal firearms. You could go to a party with 50 people, somebody has guns, you don't know about it, maybe you do, but it doesn't mean you're possessing the guns. That's what the evidence is going to show. He was there. It could have been a bazooka in that house. I don't care. Mr. Kendrick wasn't in possession of any firearms, illegal, machine gun, or otherwise. He didn't control a gun, he didn't use a gun, he didn't buy a gun, he didn't sell a gun, he didn't hold a gun. Not one witness. And there are dozens of people that they could call to say, oh yeah, I saw Mr. Kendrick hold a gun, but not one. And there could be hundreds of witnesses. I want to bury you with witnesses so that you'll forget about the presumption of innocence and what real evidence is required. Zero, not zilch, donut hole, reasonable doubt. What will they show you? What will the evidence show that night on March 9th? Well, they'll show that Mr. Kendrick was afraid. He's a black man in America, and there's a team of people swarming a house with firearms. He's not sure if the police or not. But in 2022, after COVID, the BLM riots, people like George Floyd died, he had a reasonable and healthy fear, fight or flight. Mr. Kendrick doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want to fight the police, and he doesn't want to fight people who aren't the police if they're armed. But he knew that there were people swarming the house with guns, and it turned out they were the police. So what did he do? He ran. He did the absolute smart thing to save his life. He was afraid, and he ran. And the police caught up with him shortly thereafter. Now, he's not charged with fleeing the house. He ran because he was afraid, and that's a reasonable thing to do for him, given how he grew up, where he grew up, and the state we live. And when the police caught up with him, just shortly thereafter, did they find him holding an FN, the type of gun is what described? Did they find him holding a strap machine gun? Did they find him holding a Glock? Did they find him with an AK-47, an AR-15, or any other kind of gun? No! He was unarmed because he never had a gun. There's not a scintilla of evidence that you should believe that Mr. Kendrick is guilty of any of those 3 firearm charges. Not a scintilla. Hundreds of witnesses. I asked for one to come to court and say, Mr. Kendrick was holding a gun then. What about the next set of charges? They're drug charges against my client. But all the drug charges against him, possession of cocaine, possession of codeine, all the drug charges alleged against Mr. Kendrick are again from March 9th of that year. From the date he was arrested, the party at Mr. Williams' house. And apparently the police find drugs in the house where there are dozens and dozens of people. So again, I ask you, listen to the evidence. What will the evidence show? Will the evidence show my client's fingerprints on a bag of drugs? No. Will the evidence show my client's DNA on a bag of drugs? No. Will a witness come to court and tell you he was using drugs that night at the house? No. Is there videotaping my client snorting a line of cocaine? No. Is there going to be a witness who tells you that my client sold him drugs? No. Is there a witness that's going to tell you that my client bought drugs? No. Is there going to be any evidence that my client possessed, used, bought, sold, controlled drugs on the night in question? Absolutely not. There were drugs at the house. My client was at the house. There were dozens of people at the house. 1 + 1 does not equal 3. It's another Krispy Kreme donut hole for the prosecution. 0, nada, zilch. You're not going to hear evidence that my client's blood or urine was tested and that it was in his bloodstream there was cocaine or other drugs. And the indictment says that the drugs that they're charging him with are from that date, March 9th, 2022, the day he was arrested, not any other day in his life. So the question you have to ask, the evidence you have to look at is he possessing drugs while he's at the party at that house? And there is no evidence of that, just like the guns. The next charge against my client is gang activity. And the gang activity they allege, very specifically in the indictment, it's not just any gang activity, it's gang activity related to the possession with the intent to distribute illegal drugs from March 9th of 2022. And again, where is the evidence? Not one witness. They also allege that he committed gang activity based on the guns. Same thing. There's just no evidence of it. It is not illegal to be part of a group in America. Freedom of association. Otherwise, the Atlanta Falcons would be an illegal street game because they wear red and black and they have certain symbols they wear. And the Braves, certainly the Braves, because they lost in the playoffs. Maybe the state of Wyoming died that. It's not illegal for my client to want to wear the color green and do fancy symbols with his hands, but they're going to bring dozens of witnesses in to talk about that. So what? That's not a crime. Illegal gang activity requires my client to have committed a crime and be in a gang. And YSL is not a gang, but we'll get to that in a minute. They want to attack free speech and freedom of association. They're guaranteed to us in the Constitution. And if they want to do that, then they should go out and arrest the Falcons and the Braves too. Not one witness is going to come to court and say, Mr. Kendrick possessed, sold, bought, used drugs as part of gang activity. Or possessed, sold, used a firearm as part of gang activity. I want you to tally, keep count, take notes. How many witnesses the state brings in this case? Hundreds. And I want you to remember this conversation I'm having, this one-sided conversation I'm having with you all, about how many witnesses say, my client possessed a firearm because he was a YSL gang member. My client possessed drugs because he was a YSL gang member. What is YSL? It's a successful, massively, worldwide, internationally successful record label. And my client was a part of that record label and a successful rapper and blessed with the ability to make that music. And last I checked, those lyrics, which the state is going to try and use, are just part of free speech. So we've eliminated murder, we've eliminated the gun charges, we've eliminated the drug charges, we've eliminated gang activity based on gun or drug charges. So what's left? What's left is count one, RICO. Ms. Love told you that's a term that most normal people don't use for good reason. It's a very complicated legal term. Most lawyers don't even understand it. I'm going to try to explain it to you. And you've heard a lot about overt acts versus predicate acts. Are you confused already? You should be. They want you to believe, and they want the evidence to show, that Mr. Kendrick is guilty of this vast conspiracy because who his friends are, who he hangs out with, the colors he wears on his clothing, and the lyrics that he writes, the rap music that he makes. And they suggest to you this is all part of a vast conspiracy. But the reality is, some of these lyrics may be offensive to you, and that's okay. Because in a free society, we have free speech. That doesn't make it a crime. The state says that the evidence will show that they dug to find out the murder and then used the lyrics to support it. You know, I watched Goodfellas. It was a movie about real crimes that took place. It was written by Martin Scorsese and acted out by Robert De Niro. The DA's office is going to go arrest Mr. Scorsese and Mr. De Niro. They're exercising their free speech to tell a story. Why can't my client, Mr. Williams, do the same and write lyrics about crime? Maybe they're offensive. Maybe the movie Goodfellas is offensive because you see people committing crimes. But in a free society, we're allowed to exercise free speech. It's the price we pay to live in a free country, and it's a great price. Just because someone raps about murder or other crime does not make it a crime. Why do they rap about that stuff? Because it sells records and it allows them to creatively express their feelings about how they grew up and where they grew up. And they are proposing a war on the First Amendment of freedom of association and free speech. They don't like those lyrics. They want to send a message to all those inner city kids in Atlanta who dream about getting out of the ghetto and becoming successful musicians. And their message is, you rap lyrics about crime, we're gonna indict you and charge you and brand you a criminal. That's un-American. That's wrong. The evidence will show that the state of Georgia and the city of Atlanta have been blessed in the last 20 years by the entertainment industry. And not just rap music, TV and film, and all kinds of entertainment. And some of it's fictional. And that's okay. It's okay to rap about crime or life or your experiences, even if it's not true, even if it didn't really happen. That's just free speech, ladies and gentlemen. That's not evidence of a crime. That's protected in our Constitution. It's a protected part of living in a free society. YSL was a very successful record label, and there's going to be evidence of that. It made millions and millions of dollars. That's not a criminal street gang. But it's not just a successful record label. It gave my client the opportunity to give back, to volunteer his time and some of his money. He coached an inner city youth football team. Does coaching that inner city youth football team support their RICO accusation? Because they told you the overt acts don't have to be a crime. Maybe now we should criminalize civic volunteer work. I don't know where it ends if we start making free speech illegal. They want to lump Mr. Kendrick in. They want to have you find him guilty because of other people's crimes or crimes that he already paid his debt to society for. So the state presented you some of the examples of that. Lil Wayne's tour bus got shot up. That's horrible. Whoever did that should be punished. But there's no evidence my client was there to part in it. They're alleging that's part of this case. The shooting of Chanel Drinks you heard about, gunned down in a rental car. But they're not alleging Mr. Kendrick took part in that either. And what about the attempted stabbing of Rayshawn Bennett, Wyatt, who's known as Wyatt Benucci, another rapper, and the armed robberies they alleged? None of those incidents involve Mr. Kendrick. But what they're going to argue to you is that if Mr. Kendrick was part of the YSL label, or what they call the YSL gang, that even if he's not charged with those crimes or involved in those crimes in any way, he should be found guilty of RICO conspiracy, even if he didn't commit a crime. And that's wrong. It's just wrong. That's why they have to go to such great lengths and bring hundreds of witnesses in to establish other crimes, other acts, other incidents that my client had nothing to do with. It's a bad magic trick. Look over here at Lil Wayne's tour bus. If they actually had evidence of my client committing a crime, we'd be here for a week, not months. The conspiracy they want you to criminalize is being a rapper in America and being successful. They want to attack the First Amendment. They want to attack free speech. They want to attack capitalism because they don't like rappers who rap about criminal behavior in Atlanta. And they're telling you that this is a pattern of activity, a trend to attempt to control and exert influence. But really what they're showing you is, if we don't like your speech, then some free speech is wrong and illegal. And you should find my client guilty as a result. They don't want you to find Mr. Kendrick guilty based on his actual actions, just based on the words he wrote and said. They don't want you to find Mr. Kendrick guilty of his actual actions because they don't have the evidence of it. They don't have the evidence of a murder or illegal guns or illegal drugs. They don't actually have that. So instead, they've got to play their bad magic trick. But you're smart and you can listen to the evidence and you will see it's nothing but a Krispy Kreme donut. That's what the evidence will show. You heard about wiretaps. It's basically the police listening in on people's phone conversations. And that's fine. They get a judge to approve it, they're allowed to do that. And there's hundreds and hundreds of hours of wiretaps. And I dare you to listen to all that over the next few months and hear one time my client saying, I have a gun, I have some drugs, I committed a murder. It doesn't exist. Nowhere. I'm part of the YSL gang. Remember, they told you that the YSL is this sophisticated gang, so there's no written agreement, there's no verbal agreement. It's just something you have to trust them with. Does that sound right? Just trust that. Take the government's word. And they're going to bring in experts on gang activity to tell you that the record label is a gang because they think so. Well, they work for the state, for the police. They're going to tell you what they want you to hear. But use your brain. Use your common sense. All those wiretaps, you're not going to hear Mr. Kendrick saying one time, I'm going to do something illegal. Whether it's a violent crime, a gun crime, a drug crime, or admitting he's part of a gang. Not once. In hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of wiretaps. And why? Isn't it you won't hear that? Because what is he actually? He's a former convicted felon, a former gang member, and a current recording artist, a current rapper with YSL, and a current member of society doing civic duty. They have to point at his past and get you to only look at that because the actual evidence from March 9th and from January 10th, the 2 dates in the indictment that accused my client, there's no evidence of him committing a crime. The state turned over to us, prosecution, 6 terabytes of data in this case. Now, I'm not a computer expert, but I want to talk to you about what the evidence will show. A lot of that evidence you're going to hear and see. What is a terabyte? It's an enormous amount of computer data. And here's what I'll sort of tell you the analogy is. If it were pieces of paper, 6 terabytes would be 420 million pages of documents. 420 million pages. That's how much evidence there is in this case. Is there one page? Is there one witness? One set of fingerprints, one set of DNA, one videotape that shows my client committed a murder, that shows my client possessed illegal drugs, that shows my client possessed a firearm, that shows my client committed illegal gang activity, or that my client conspired with others to commit crimes? It's a donut hole. It's a Krispy Kreme donut hole. You don't get the glaze, you don't get the donut, you just get the air in the middle. What did Mr. Kendrick do? Oh, they have pictures of him flashing gang signs and wearing green. They have pictures of him standing on the hood of Rayshawn Bennett's car at Lenox Mall. Oh, God forbid. He stood on the hood of another rapper's car, and they want you to believe that is the evidence that he's part of this vast conspiracy. No, standing on someone else's car, it's a nice car, is juvenile. It's silly. Maybe it's even a misdemeanor. But they didn't charge him with that misdemeanor. Instead, they charged him with a RICO conspiracy. Standing on the hood of this other rapper's car must be proof that he's part of this vast conspiracy they're alleging. Quite frankly, the real juvenile behavior is all these hundreds and hundreds of witnesses to try and prove something that doesn't exist. There are lots of other overt acts, and I'm not going to belabor each one of them to you because you heard most of them from Mr. Steele and from the state. But you've also heard from me. If there's a witness who says Mr. Kendrick possessed a firearm or possessed illegal drugs or murdered Donovan Thomas, they saw him murder Donovan Thomas, then bring that person to court. Mr. Copeland, their star witness, is going to come to court and say that Mr. Kendrick admitted to him, Mr. Copeland, that he was part of the group that killed Donovan Thomas. You going to believe Mr. Copeland, who has every incentive to lie? That's the evidence they want to rely on. That's what they're keeping us here for months and months for. The guy who was charged with the crime, who now says it's not him, it's my client instead. Please tell me there's something better, something else that we're here for. Please tell me we have anything near proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We don't. There's no real or concrete evidence my client committed a crime. Not a single offense. Not RICO, not gang activity, not guns, not drugs, and definitely not murder. Ms. Love talked about the wolf pack. I understand that. She thinks the evidence will show that. But I really think it's more like the boy who cried wolf. You know that old story.
Boy cried wolf.
There's a wolf. There's a wolf. There's a wolf. And it turns out there wasn't a wolf. That's the state's case, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
And that is why you will come back many months from now and find my client, Mr. Diamante Kendrick, not guilty on every single count. Thank you.
That was good, y'all. That was excellent. That was excellent. The boys that cried wolf. The state is the boy that cried wolf. All right, guys. That was it for this, and then I'm gonna continue with the other ones. Charts. Miss D. Williams, Mr. Steele, and Chard, and Mr. Matthew. Okay. You guys have a wonderful, 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 wonderful night. I'll see you guys in the morning. Get some rest. And we'll be back in court. I contacted the court, and I found out that they were open today. And so therefore they shall be open tomorrow. And I'll be there bright and early if you guys. I was sitting here all this time. I didn't walk away. I've been here. But I'll see you guys in the morning if the Lord's willing. If the creek don't rise, is what the old folks used to say. All right, let's do our little prayer. May the Lord watch between me and thee while we're absent one from another. Amen. Good night, guys. Have a good one.